A couple years ago, my wife and I decided to do a road trip for a week up in the mountains in Virginia. We've always loved the idea of driving through luscious forests and seeing the beautiful mountains there. We didn't have a plan of where we were going or where we were staying. It was kind of a last-minute decision. All that was packed were some clothes and a handful of water bottles. It was our second day on the road trip, and we had been driving for 5 hours without seeing another car or restaurant. I'll admit that I was getting a little sick of the car at that point, but that didn't stop us from rolling the windows down and singing at the top of our lungs. Out of nowhere, we heard the loud roaring of a car. I looked in the rear-view mirror to see a rusted red truck behind us. The truck was really close to us. The driver began honking his horn over and over again. "What is his problem?" I said. I stuck my hand out the window and gestured to him to go around us, but he kept honking his horn. There was no one out here but us. He could easily go around us. I was getting nervous and started to sweat. The driver eventually moved to the other lane and sped right past us. I didn't understand what happened, but thankfully he drove off. After that encounter, I was glad to see a gas station a couple miles ahead. I couldn't wait to stretch my legs and take my mind off of what happened. I drove up to the gas pump and started refueling the car. The gas station was small and the mini-mart looked slightly bigger than a shack. I walked into the mini-mart and saw a middle-aged man wearing a ripped hat behind the register. "Hi, I was wondering if there were any motels or restaurants nearby." The man had a frown on his face and said, "The nearest place is 40 miles back the way you came." He slowly stood up and peered out the window to where my wife was sitting. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "We're just seeing where the road takes us." He then turned to me, leaned over the counter and said, "You need to turn back. There's nowhere to go beyond this point." I could see there was clearly a road in front of us. I said, "Well, we'll follow any place the road takes us." I was confused why he said that, and he seemed a little angry that we were even here. "Fill up your car and leave," he said. I was about to say something back until I saw that he had a shotgun on the table next to him. I didn't want any trouble, so I nodded my head and left. My wife saw the look on my face and asked what happened. I didn't want to worry her and just said there was nothing to eat in there but beef jerky. I wasn't going to let that man tell me where I couldn't go, so as soon as my tank was full, I drove onto the road ahead of me. The sun was setting and I turned on my headlights. I noticed a sign on the right side of the road and it said "No trespassing." 30 seconds later, I saw another sign that was clearly handmade in bright red that said "Turn back now." I didn't see any properties up ahead, it was just all forest. I was starting to get nervous. Then out of nowhere, I saw headlights on the left side of the forest. The rusted red truck from earlier came into view and drove straight into the road ahead of us, cutting me off from driving forward. I quickly hit the brakes and the car skidded forward. 2 men suddenly jumped out of the truck. Their clothes were ripped up and covered in dirt. One of them had a rifle. I started to panic. I could hear my wife say, "Dan, I don't like this." I was putting my car into reverse when the smaller man with no gun said, "I wouldn't do that." I looked up to see that the other man had a gun pointing straight at us. The small man slowly walked over to my car and looked at my wife and smiled. "Well, hello, darling, I haven't seen you around." I shouted, "Don't talk to her." He dropped his smile and turned to me. He had the most evil look I had ever seen. He then started running up to the car and tried to open the door. My wife was screaming as I fought to keep the door from opening. As I was struggling, a loud bang came from behind my car. The small man froze and backed away from my car. I turned around and saw that it was the man from the gas station pointing his gun at the 2 men. "Get out of here," he shouted. Both of the men hopped into their truck, taking their time to leave and didn't take their eyes off me. Eventually, they drove back into the forest. The man from the gas station said, "I told you not to come out here. It isn't safe. Now get out of here before they come back." I was so shocked that I couldn't say anything. I just drove off the way we came. I always look back at that experience and wish I could have thanked the man that saved us. He wasn't trying to scare us. He was trying to help us. I will always be grateful for him. My friends and I graduated recently from college, and we wanted to celebrate by going to our childhood cabin in the mountains. Our parents used to take us there each summer when we were in high school. I will always remember the late-night talks we had by the campfire, so we decided to go back there as a present to ourselves. It would be one of the last times we would all be together for a long time. Mike was driving us this time. He said he knew a detour to get to the mountains faster. I've never taken that path, but I trusted Mike to get us there. I started to like this new detour. There were more tall trees and mist on this path. I had my feet hanging out the window and Paul was taking a nap in the back seat. Everything was going smoothly until we saw what was up ahead. "Hey, check this out," Mike said. I looked up and saw that there were several tire marks on the road and a trail of broken glass and metal. After a couple seconds of driving, we saw one car pulled off on the side of the road. The front of the car was smashed in. "Paul, wake up," I said. Paul lazily sat up and stared out the window. Mike pulled off to the side of the road. We then saw a second car up ahead with its back windows broken. "I wonder if they're all right," Mike said. I looked at both cars and noticed there was no one in either of them. "Where are they?" I said. "I'm kind of curious now. Let's see if we can find anyone." The three of us headed over to the first car we saw. There was a backpack in the passenger seat, a purse, and 2 water bottles, but no people. I started looking into the forest to see if there was any movement, but I saw nothing. It was dead silent too. It gave me an unsettling feeling. "Guys, come over here," Mike yelled. He was at the first car we saw. Paul and I jogged over to him. The car was on, and yet there were still no people. I looked all around and shouted, "Hello? Is there anyone here?" But no one answered back. It was eerily silent. I walked a few steps into the forest to get a better view, and that's when I noticed some blood on a tree nearby. I called for my friends and showed them what I saw. But there wasn't a trail. Just one streak of blood on the tree. None on the ground and none in the cars. Not to mention there weren't any footsteps that I could see. Paul then said, "Well, it could just be paint or part of the tree. I didn't buy it. There was an accident here and no people were in the cars. They must have gone into the forest." I wanted to investigate more, but I was starting to get scared myself, and the sun was starting to set. I did not want us to get stuck out here in the dark. As soon as I turned around to go back to the car, I heard a crunching noise behind me. I quickly looked around. I heard it again, but to the left of me. "Hello?" I shouted. There was still no response. I started to get goosebumps. There was rustling in the bushes 100 feet from me. No one answered back and there were no human sounds, but I had a feeling we weren't alone. It could be an animal there. I was getting more scared now at this point and just started to jog back. I could hear multiple noises from behind me, but I didn't look back. I yelled at my friends to get in the car. Before we drove off, I swear I saw something move between the trees, but maybe it was my imagination. My friends said that those people probably got picked up by an ambulance and that's why they weren't there. We continued on with our road trip, but I kept thinking about that experience the entire time. When we left the cabin, we took the regular path home. I still don't know to this day where those people are, or if they were in trouble. I feel like a coward for not doing more, but I was afraid that something bad would happen to us if we didn't leave. I attended a friend's wedding a couple months ago in New Mexico and decided to drive down there instead of taking a plane. I thought I could save money by doing that, but I regret it now. The drive was long, and the road was never ending. It was a little lonely, but luckily I had my playlist to keep me company. I was really tired and wanted to sleep, but I only had to drive a couple more hours until I reached my friend's house, so I decided to keep going. As I was driving along the endless road, I saw a man standing off to the side sticking his thumb out. He looked like he was in his mid-30s, had black hair that went down to his shoulders, and was extremely red from the sun. I also noticed his clothing was a bit weird. He wore green and black checkered pants that were too short to reach his ankles. He had mismatched shoes, and a shirt that looked like a blouse my aunt would wear. It didn't match at all. But everyone is different and has their own styles, I suppose. I'm not the type of person to usually pick up hitchhikers, but I felt bad for the guy. The man looked like he was baking in the sun, and there wouldn't be another rest stop for a while. I had 1 more hour of driving left, so I thought I might as well help him out until I get to my friend's house. As I approached him, I rolled down my window and said, "You need a ride?" The man bent down to look at me and smiled. "Yeah, man, that'd be great, thanks." I unlocked the car and the hitchhiker hopped into the passenger seat. What I wasn't prepared for was the smell that came with him. He smelled like he came out of a sewer and hadn't showered in days. I didn't want to seem rude with my reaction, so I just rolled down the window. "Thanks for picking me up, I've been out there for days," he said. "No problem. Where are you headed?" The man didn't answer right away. He looked out the window and said, "I'm looking for something new." I thought that was a weird way to phrase finding a new location, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I responded, "Okay, well, I can drop you off at the nearest town. I'm Jay, by the way." The man turned to me and said, "I'm Otto." I noticed that his skin on his cheeks and lips were peeling, so I offered him a water bottle. "Would you like one?" Otto took it from my hand and started inspecting it. "Is there something wrong with it?" I asked. He smiled and said, "I'm used to a more dark-colored drink. It tastes a little like copper." That answer didn't settle right with me. I was starting to think I made a mistake picking him up. We drove for a couple miles in silence when Otto started fidgeting and talking to himself. I tried to ignore his strange behavior and kept on driving. At the corner of my eye, I saw him pull out a little wooden box from his pocket and opened it. He took whatever was inside his box and put it in his mouth. He looked at me and said, "Do you want one? They're delicious." I shook my head and said, "No, thank you. I just ate an hour ago." Truthfully, I didn't want to eat anything he gave me. He then began pulling out more random objects, a watch, a ring, a lighter, and some other stuff. Then I gasped as he pulled out a pocket knife. "Hey man, you need to put that away," I demanded. "It's just a little pocket knife, Jay. Too small to really do any damage," he said as he tilted his head. My heart was racing so fast at this moment. All I could do was keep driving. Otto pulled the blade out and brought it close to my face. My hands became sweaty, and I started to shake. In the most sinister voice I've heard, he said, "CJ, it's not so big. I just wanted to show you my collection of things I took." I looked at the knife and it had the name Joan written on it. He clearly wasn't Joan. Otto kept talking. "I always love finding something new to add to the collection. A memento from everyone I encounter. Do you have something I can take, Jay?" He began laughing as he said that. I was afraid he was going to hurt me at this point. I suddenly stopped the car and shouted, "Get out of my car!" I tried to seem brave, but we both knew I was afraid. The man began breathing heavily and had a twisted look on his face. I was stunned at what was happening, but I shouted again, "Get out of here, you freak!" Otto was still breathing heavily, but he slowly got out of my car and shut the door. I pressed on the gas so fast and didn't dare look back at him. My heart was pounding nonstop. After a few miles, I had to pull over to steady myself. I looked over on the passenger seat and saw that he left his wooden box. I opened it all the way and gagged. It was full of fingernails. He was eating fingernails as snacks. I threw the box out of the window in a panic. Had he ripped off people's fingernails with that pocket knife? I don't want to know. That was something I'll never forget. When I was 16, my dad and I traveled across the US during my summer vacation. We loved going to new places together, and he got a new job that allowed him to work from anywhere in the world, so we decided to hit all 50 states this summer. My dad and I especially like going on outdoor adventures like swimming in new lakes, fishing, hunting, and hiking. It's always the best when we find secluded places that are untouched. It's like we're the first ones seeing it. We've been driving through the mountains for the last week and have gone through 9 different trails. I wanted to get one last hike in before our environment changed to a desert setting soon. As we rounded a bend in the road, there was a sign off to the side that said walking trail. I pointed it out to my dad and he knew he had to pull over. We were both sore but still excited about finding this trail. "All right, son, we have 3 hours to explore before sundown," my dad said. I replied, "That's plenty of time." I looked at my phone and set a timer for an hour and a half, just so we have enough time to head back. I led the way into the mountains, passing by monstrously tall trees and hearing the sounds of nature all around me. 45 minutes passed by, and that's when things started to get weird. As we took a 5-minute water break, I looked around the forest to see where we should head to next. But then I noticed that one tree didn't look like the rest. It had a symbol carved into it. There were a lot of lines and jagged edges. It wasn't like any symbol I've seen before. "Dad, come check this out. Do you know what this is?" As he approached, he put on his glasses to inspect the tree. "No, I've never seen this before." I looked around and saw that more than one tree had the symbol on it. I couldn't investigate any further because our break was done and we headed back out onto the trail. After a while, I started to feel uneasy. I stopped walking and said, "Dad, wait. Do you hear that?" He stopped and looked up to the sky. "I don't hear anything," he replied. "Isn't that weird, though? There's no birds chirping or branches swaying in the wind. It's dead silent." The silence was eerie, almost like it was unnatural. We kept walking for a couple minutes, and then stopped dead in our tracks. There was a giant tree in front of us, and it had strings tied to every single branch. At the end of those strings were sticks tied together that formed into the symbol we saw carved on the tree earlier. I didn't like this. It didn't feel right. Before I could say anything, my dad grabbed my arm and pulled me with him behind a tree that was close by. "Don't say anything," he said. I was very confused until he nodded to the direction past the tree with the symbols. I saw a group of people in black clothing huddled around in a circle. I looked closer and my eyes widened. There was what looked like red paint on their backs, shaped as the symbol we've been seeing. I could feel myself getting worked up. What was going on? I could hear them talking, but we were too far away to make out what they were saying. My dad grabbed onto my arm again, pulling me back the way we came, until I heard a loud beeping sound. My alarm was going off. I quickly stopped it and looked up. The people in the circle were now staring at us. All of them started walking our way and my dad screamed, "Run!" I began sprinting back to the trail from where we came, and could hear my dad right behind me. "Don't stop," he yelled. I could hear the people shouting behind us, but I was panicking too much to understand them. My lungs were burning, and it felt like I was running for an eternity. "Go left and hide behind the brush in front of you," my dad said. I followed his directions and hid in the place he wanted. My dad sprinted over to the tree next to me and hid behind it. 5 seconds later, I could hear people running past us down the path. It sounded like there were at least 10 people running after us. We kept quiet for 10 more minutes before I finally spoke. "Dad, we can't go that way. They'll be looking for us there." I then heard bushes rustling behind us. I turned to see a woman standing there. My dad jumped in front of me, shielding me if anything were to happen. The woman didn't say anything. She just put a finger to her lips, telling us not to talk. She then pointed to the direction behind her. It took a few seconds for it to sink in. She was giving us another path to go down. My dad grabbed my hand and led me to the direction she showed us. It took 2 hours to get back to the car, and we didn't run into anyone else. We drove away in silence, too stunned to talk about what happened. The one thing I kept thinking about during the whole car ride was the woman. I will always remember her face, especially her eyes. They were completely black, as if I were looking at a demon.